So, hi everyone, I am Martyn Hall. I'm a UK Business Development Manager for Dynamics 365 with Ingram Cloud, and I'm joined today with Curt. Curt, do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hi everyone, my name's Curt. I'm the Sales Director at Cloud9 Insight. We're a specialist Microsoft Dynamics CRM partner, and we've helped over 700 clients of various different shapes and sizes with the implementation, support and training of Microsoft Dynamics.
Cool. So today we're actually going to talk some licensing questions. I don't know about you, Curt, but I always get asked by a lot of partners different licensing questions, and sometimes it's quite difficult to find the answers.
Yep.
Yeah.
Every time the licensing guide comes out, it seems to get more pages with more caveats and different points. So hopefully we can leave some of those queries today.
Yeah, so just thinking of some of the common sort of questions that we tend to get. I'm looking at things like the most obvious one I get is sales professional and sales enterprise. What's the difference? And I know it's not quite a licensing question, but licensing doesn't help for that.
Yeah, sure. No, it's a good question. As you say, it comes up a lot. So, sales enterprise is the flagship. It's the solution that provides all the features and functions that a sales team would need. Sales professional, the idea is that it's lighter, cheaper version, but it does come with limited functionality and also limitations around your potential capacity to grow. So, if you think about some of the features, some of the main things missing from the professional are competitor analysis. So you're not able to track whether you're winning or losing during the sales process, and forecasting. So this is perhaps the most popular tool in the sales module, which isn't available in the professional. This is something that provides a live view of what business is coming in, what your pipeline is, how your team is performing against target. So they're probably the two most important things that are missing from the professional license. As you get bigger, larger sales teams, enterprise provides territory management, which is of course useful if you've got a global or national sales team, and also provides sales goals and KPIs. So again, these are things not in the professional, which certainly for larger teams, we see that they're more of a need. The final bit of functionality, I guess, is around the products. So with the product catalog, this is quite limited in the professional SKU, which does provide a challenge for organizations with multiple price lists or lots of different product offerings. So they're sort of the core features and functionality. I guess, professional is aimed to be a standalone solution. It's probably something that you're not looking to bolt on with things like sales insights or AI intelligence, LinkedIn, sales navigator integration. And you also have limitations around building custom integrations as well. So maybe with an ERP platform or something like that. So there's no sandbox in that professional level, which obviously limitations to your needs. So, in summary, I think enterprise normally is well worth the extra £20 or so per month. Unless you're a small team, small business with probably less than 10 users, and you're fairly confident that your CRM is going to remain at a fairly simple level for its life.
So we're probably looking at some of the smaller businesses would be looking at professional, which actually kind of leads me on to another question then. That great, you started off really small, you've introduced sales professional, it's actually really helped your business, you've grown, hurrah, awesome. How do you then make that switch into enterprise? How easy is that transition?
Yeah, again, it's one of those things you'd hope would be quite straightforward, but unfortunately not quite the case. The enterprise and professional licenses, they actually sit on different platforms. So if you wish to upgrade from professional into enterprise, you actually need to go through an element of a migration from one instance to another. So it is doable, but of course there's an element of work there. So it brings us back to that idea of, do we see ourselves growing with CRM in the future? And if you do, it's probably worth going for enterprise straight off the bat.
It's good thought to have, actually, yeah. And then more licensing stuff would be around, I'm just thinking some of the larger teams you may have. How do you license team members, and how has the license changes affected that license in particular recently?
Yeah, so there was quite big changes brought in at the beginning of this year, so 2021. Microsoft have enforced some new restrictions of the team member license. So the license type is certainly aimed at very limited users of Dynamics. We would certainly say by practice that they're not completing a business process, but from time to time might need to view a record or add a note. So, very simple usage. Previously, team members were able to access the main solution, but now they have to have their own app, which is created, and that's where the strict enforcements of those restrictions come in. If we take the sales module as an example, team members can access their own pre-built app online, on the mobile, or through the Outlook integration. So they can still access in the multiple areas, but they are strictly limited to just using activities. So this is your emails, your phone calls, and tasks. And that's also restricted to be within contact records. So that means they can't access opportunities, they can't access accounts. So, the team member can still use custom entities, which are used to store specific types of data. So it might be an event or holiday request. But again, there are limitations about how many of those you can play with. And as you look to build a data model, 15, which is the limit, you can use that up quite quickly.
Yeah, so very, very light access essentially, and then just thinking about it, it's worth having that thought process mapped out whether someone will actually need a full license versus team members very early on with your implementations. Yeah,
absolutely. So when we take clients through the initial scoping, we'll identify with them who the user roles are and who the security roles. So that will be not just for who can access what in terms of security, but also from a licensing point of view, who will need the different licenses. As a general rule, the team member is perhaps not fit for purpose as a salesperson or a customer service agent, but it might support someone like a receptionist or a PA or an EA type role, someone who takes a phone call or takes an inbound email, stores that against a contact, and then might create a task for somebody else in the organization to do that follow-up.
Okay. So if I put myself in sort of a customer's shoes and I'm thinking, that's great, team members understand that now. I'm also starting to think, well, actually, I've heard of things like Power Apps as well, and I've heard Dataverse being mentioned, and Dynamics is now using the Dataverse. It's kind of like, well, actually, how can I leverage something like Power Apps to access data from the Dataverse that has data in Dynamics 365 Sales Enterprise, for instance?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are these new licensing options now that are coming out, and the Dataverse, which was previously the Common Data Service or Common Data Model, it's essentially a data warehouse that underpins all of the Microsoft applications. So essentially it allows you to have a central data model with different applications pulling and pushing data to provide an app experience based on who the user is. So, the idea is that one user could be completing a simple use case in Power Apps, something like a risk assessment or a holiday request, and the data they're entering or editing is pushing and pulling from that Dataverse. And if you think, meanwhile, user number 2, for example, might be the maintenance manager. He's actually viewing all of the jobs and data that user number 1 and his colleagues are doing as part of that Power Apps, but he might be looking at it in Dynamics. So the Dataverse really, as I said, underpins, but it then uses standard API calls from the Dataverse out into the relevant applications. So when you choose which license that your user needs based on its, the requirements, that will then give you a limitation of API calls. So if you have a Dynamics solution, you can use up to 20,000 API calls in the 24-hour period. And again, this is per user, so it is really defined by who that user is and what they do. Whereas for Power Apps, it's only 5,000. So again, there are possibilities of using them both in unison, but you just have to be careful that certainly for Power Apps, the actual use case is fairly simple because you don't want to run out of data that you're going to be able to pull.
Okay. And then the other thought then is if it's a Power Apps seeded license within Dynamics as well, because a lot of customers will have heard of this, a lot of partners have heard of this, and that's something I don't think we've explored an awful lot with licensing previously either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is something certainly very new. So as we understand it, that the seeded licenses, if you like, are those that are bundled with Dynamics and Office 365 as an example. So these are licenses where you can start to use Power Apps, but you're not paying for a per app or an unlimited app. You're essentially just almost using them as like grandfather rights, if you think of how driving licenses used to work. These are available to use, but they actually have even more limitations than if you were to buy the standard license. So some of these include things like not being able to use not being able to use premium connectors when it comes to Power Automate, for example. You can only use standard connectors. Other things are things like API limitations. So we just spoke there about 5,000 or 20,000. Well, if you're using these seeded licenses, that's actually limited to 2,000. So you can see very quickly this starts to make your ability to use those seeded licenses even more challenging, if you like, or very difficult. Again, it can be used for very, very simple tasks, but the wider that gets, the more data that's needed. It's perhaps not an ideal license to use.
And then that actually leads me on to another thought about the seeded licenses, because there's some M365 SKUs that have seeded licenses as well. So this is kind of like, well, if you've got a seeded license for, say, Power Automate or Power Apps within M365 and your license for Dynamics 365, what are the limitations that get put in place there? Are they able to talk across M365 and Dynamics at the same time?
Yeah, of course. So again, this is one of them where there's a lot of points to read over and try to put it into practice. But as we understand it, these seeded licenses have a limited capability for the CDS, or Dataverse, as it were. So there are restrictions if you think about Dynamics, and they are perhaps even more strict than the typical team member license. So again, we have those restrictions around entities. We have restrictions around what they can access and what they can view. And again, if you're looking to scale, there's also applications with things like the Power Apps portals, for example. So certainly these seeded licenses perhaps have quite a lot of limitations if you are really looking to build that unified solution with the various applications talking to each other.
It seems to be an ever-increasing area of discussion, licensing. I think that licensing document, you can see why now, if anyone's watching, you can see why this is updated regularly, and why the likes of Cloud9 are seen as experts in the field, because there's a lot of information out there. But yeah, thank you very much for your time, Curt. It is a minefield, and I think guys like you, we rely on to make things a little bit simpler.
You're very welcome. From our side, we understand there's a lot to get your head round. So, similar to other partners of ours, we see ourselves as pretty well in the know on the Dynamics piece. So, if you have any specific questions around modules or licensing or limitations, I'm sure Martyn will share our details. I'm more than happy to reach out.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Very welcome.